And we're being recorded. And thank you again so much for joining us. Again, this is Carrie Torres. She is a phenomenal teacher at Kapiolani Community College, and she teaches TESOL. So she teaches in all modalities, and she is just such a thoughtful educator. And what she's going to do today is talk about a lot of digital tools that we can use for a diverse range of learners. And just personally, what I love about the way Carrie approaches this is that she always is pedagogy and learners first. And then she looks at her huge toolkit of technologies and aligns that with her pedagogical goals. So yay for that. And yeah, without further ado, I'll just turn it over to Carrie. Thank you so much.
Ooh, all right, after that introduction, I'm gonna have to really say something. Okay, I'm gonna just share my screen here. First of all, thank you guys all for coming and showing up. I know we are all super busy, especially this time of the semester. So I'm just gonna get right into it. I'm gonna talk about digital tools to support diverse learners. And just a quick overview, I'm going to drop a handout in the chat box right now. You don't need it during the session, but it's basically, I'm going to talk about a bunch of apps and programs, and mostly free or freemium, things that you get most of it free and then some of it is paid for. So everything I'm going to share you can do for free. And I just have links to all of those apps and then some tutorials in the handout. So if you want to look a little bit more in depth into anything that I talk about today, you can use that handout. I'll put it in the chat again at the end. So hopefully that'll help you after, in case you forget anything that I say. Also, I'd like you to grab a piece of paper. I know that sounds weird since we're talking about online learning, but I actually think it can be really helpful for our students to give them a balance between technology and doing things that are off screen. So I'm going to encourage you as we go along. We're going to have a few points where I'm going to ask you to pause and just jot some notes down on an actual piece of paper. If you're not already doing that with your students, you can kind of see how that feels to take a little screen break throughout. And before we get all the way started, I just want to do a little temperature check with everybody. And I just want to ask you, which baby Yoda are you today? We have happy, excited, good, meh, sleepy, sad. So you can just drop whichever one you are. You can just type that in the chat, or you can leave me an emoji. All right, we have some happy and excited, some good. I think for week 13, that's pretty good. Sleepy, I hear that. Oh, hey, Tammy, of course you're sleepy. That's understandable. All right, awesome. Lots of positives along with the sleepy, which by week 13, I think we all are, right? Well, I'm going to get right into it because I want to share a bunch of tools and strategies with you today, and I want to try to leave time at the end for questions. So basically, what I want to talk about today are just briefly who are our students. I want to talk a little bit about learner variability and then some literacy and learning needs, which can become more challenging for students in this online environment. And then I'm going to spend the majority of the time talking about how to support our diverse learners online by intentionally using digital tools. So I think by now, most people, or maybe everybody, has already started exploring and using some digital tools. So I want to talk about kind of framing this through the lens of intentionality and goals first. But first, I want to just talk for a minute about our learners and really coming at this from the perspective that learner variability is the norm, that all of the learners in our classroom, whether they look like they've come from similar backgrounds, similar education backgrounds or not, They are all highly, highly diverse, whether we see it or not. And when we think about our learners as being highly diverse, as that being the norm, it kind of helps us think about the way that we present information and the way we provide opportunities for our students to interact and participate in our class. I included a link on the handout for a video by Dr. Todd Rose, and he is just brilliant and amazing. And the video is called Variability Matters. And I really encourage you guys to check it out. It's about 7.5 minutes long. So I didn't want to show it in this session and use up that time, but he really goes into depth, excuse me, about just how diverse our different learners are. And I think it's really powerful for thinking about designing instruction that meets the needs of all of our learners. So, like many of you, I imagine back in March when we shifted to online learning, you probably got loads of emails in your inbox telling you these are, the 35 top tools for education or the 75 apps every teacher needs, or all of these different, excuse me, all of these different resources. And it can be really overwhelming. I just came across this Education Week article the other day called "The Flood of Online Learning Resources Overwhelms Teachers." And I think this really can be the case. I've talked to a lot of teachers who feel like there are just so many apps and so many programs, and I don't know which ones to do. I definitely don't have time to learn them all. And I think this is what I want to do today, is share a variety of digital tools, but start by focusing on what the need is for your classroom goals, and then selecting tools to meet that need, rather than seeing a new tool or seeing an email that says every teacher should use these 10 tools, but really being intentional about thinking about, what do I want my students to do? What kind of content do I need them to access? Where are the challenges in this online learning? And then identifying which tools help support the learners and reduce any barriers that they're facing. So you can ignore all of those emails that tell you that there are 75 must-have tools, because that's just crazy. I like the quote the author used in this article, that it can kind of feel like drinking from a fire hose, where it's good stuff in there, but it's just passing you by. Another teacher that was mentioned in the article also said, "There's an abundance of awesome for sure, but I'm not quite sure how to navigate it." And so that's the goal today. I am going to share a lot of tools, but I don't want you to start suddenly using all of them next week. I want you to think about which of them fit the needs of your classroom, because some of what I share might not be for you. So with that, that's the idea of intentional design. And I think in online learning, even more so than in face-to-face learning, intentional design is critical. Being really intentional about how we're setting up our activities, how we're setting up our instruction, and then what supports we're providing. So we can think about, what do our students need to do? Well, they need to access and understand information. That's probably true across the board. We also need our students to demonstrate and apply their knowledge and understanding. And they need to engage, communicate, and interact with their teachers and their classmates. And so when we think about it and we break it down into these different areas, we can now think about, what is the information they need to access, and what method of delivery or what digital tool can we use to support their access and their understanding. So with the digital tools, as I mentioned, we really want to start with the goal first. They should support instructional goals and not take over instruction. It can be really tempting to see a new technology or a new app and think about, oh, this is so cool, how do I fit it into my instruction? Rather than thinking about, what is the goal and what will support the goal. I have sadly let go of a few tools that I thought were really cool, but they just didn't really fit with my instructional goals. So I ended up not using them. We also want digital tools to reduce barriers and support student needs. And I'm going to use this phrase, reduce barriers, throughout the session today, but I want to make it really clear that I'm talking about barriers in our instruction, barriers in the content, the curriculum, the delivery. These are not barriers in the students. If the student can't understand the information they need to understand, it's not the problem that the student doesn't understand. I like to look at it as the problem is the information is not being presented in an understandable way. So that's where we're going to look for the barriers, because we can change that. We can't change our students, but we can change the way we provide our instruction. And as I mentioned, we don't want the tech to take over assessment and instruction. And often less is more. If we use a few tools really well and regularly, our students will learn to use them, they'll become comfortable with them, and then they will sort of disappear into the background of the learning, rather than students focusing on learning the tool with the content being secondary, which often can happen with technology. So I'm going to organize the information that I share today using the framework of Universal Design for Learning. And I'm not really going to talk much about Universal Design for Learning itself today, because I could talk to you about that for days, and that's probably not what you really came for. I did include some links on the handout in case you want to look into it more. But Universal Design for Learning, if you're not familiar with it, is a framework for designing instruction and thinking about ways to reduce barriers and increase access for our diverse learners. And the framework is based on neuroscience and the strategic networks in our brain and how we learn. So it's really, really solid. And basically, it's looking at the best way to provide supports for our students are to provide multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression. So we're going to look throughout this session at how to use multiple means of representation to ensure that our students can access and understand the information that we're providing, and to support students to demonstrate their knowledge and apply that knowledge and understanding. We're going to look at ways to use digital tools to support providing multiple means of action and expression, and then to provide multiple means of engagement to help our students engage, communicate, and interact in the online environment. So that's the framework that I'm going to be using today. And if you want to talk more about UDL, send me an email. I'm always happy to talk about it. So I'm going to start by looking at digital tools that can support us to provide multiple means of representation. And I'm going to start by looking at what some of the challenges that our students might face in accessing and understanding information that can be a little bit more challenging online. So for accessing information or any type of input, it's important to remember that when we talk about information or input, it's not just our textbook, if we're using a textbook, or our activities. It actually includes the directions for any activity. It includes my teacher talk, anything that I'm sharing in a narrated lesson, or any type of information the students have to process. And in the online environment, often this translates to more text-based information and text-based teacher talk. So students are getting a lot more written directions rather than verbal instructions in class and things like that. And that can cause some challenges. Also in the online environment, as I'm sure everyone's aware, students often have less opportunity to ask clarifying questions. In a synchronous class, they might not feel like they can stay after and ask. They might not feel comfortable unmuting their microphone and talking. And if you're in an asynchronous setting, the students don't have the opportunity to raise their hand or turn to a peer and say, hey, did you catch that? So these are things that we want to build in extra supports for. So some of the strategies that I'm going to talk through today are captioning audio and video sources to provide that additional support, providing step-by-step instructions. This one sounds obvious, but I have a few tips for that. Chunking information with questions, developing resource banks for students with multimedia, and then enhancing digital text with support. So let's take a look at some of these. The first one is something I learned this semester, which I'm really excited about, is captioning when you are presenting live. So if you record videos and you're going to post them for your students, if you upload them to YouTube, YouTube will automatically caption if you're speaking English. And then all you have to do is go in and edit those captions to add any punctuation. If you use Hawaiian words, fix the spelling, diacriticals, and just make sure that it's accurate. You don't actually have to transcribe everything yourself. If you're presenting live, like I am today, you can actually turn on captioning right in Google Slides. So if you can see the presenter bar at the bottom here, whoops, it just went away. Come back. There it is. If I click where it says CC for captions, it will actually start captioning live. And the captions in Google Slides are pretty good. Now, if I say something about Laulima, it's not going, oh, it did. Prove me wrong. Sometimes it doesn't catch words like that, but in general, if you're speaking English, it's pretty good. I tried out a few other languages and it did not work so well. Basic greeting words, if you say konnichiwa or hola, it'll catch that. But if you try to actually speak a whole nother language, Google Slides is not ready for you. One thing that I have noticed is that some students get really distracted by the captioning. So if you have students that don't like the captioning, you can just advise them to open up a Word document and then just position it on their desktop, covering up the captions. I have found that a lot of my non-native speakers really like having the captions when I'm presenting in Zoom. It helps them to follow along. But as I mentioned, if you're going to teach asynchronously and you're going to post videos for students to watch after, I recommend doing it through YouTube or another application so that you have the option to edit it. So the next thing is to provide really clear instructions. And I think one of the best ways to do that is with a screencast. When you're in a face-to-face class, you can show your students what you want them to do. You can walk them through a project or an assignment. You can open up Laulima and show them where to access something. And that's a little bit harder in the online environment. And when we just give instructions to our students, verbally or via text, it can be really hard for them to imagine what we want. So I recommend doing screencast videos, which you can do pretty quickly and easily using a variety of free apps. Most Macs have QuickTime built in and you can record your screen. You can also use Loom and Screencastify or Screencast-O-Matic for free. I especially recommend doing this if you're going to have students use a new app or a new type of technology so that they can actually see you walk through the process of how to create an account, how to sign in, how to do exactly what you want them to do. Because sometimes it's the littlest things, even just logging in or creating an account to use Flipgrid or something like that can be a barrier for students. So I recommend creating just a quick tutorial video that shows you going through it on your screen. I also recommend if you're going to use a new piece of technology with students, for example, maybe you want them to create a video, I recommend having them do something easy before they have to do it for a graded assignment. For example, my students are going to do a video final presentation. So earlier in the semester, they created a video self-introduction. The stakes were very low. They know the content very well because they're just talking about themselves. So it gave them a little bit of time to learn how to create that video before they were going to be graded on it. So it was low pressure. Now when it comes to the final presentation, they're ready to do it. I'll just show you a couple of seconds of this tutorial video that I showed you so you can kind of get a sense of what I can show the students that they might not see in the instructions.
This presentation will show you how to create and share Google Docs. The first step is to log into your UH Gmail account. Then click on the small 9 dots in the upper right-hand corner. From this menu, select the Docs icon for Google Docs. This will open up the Google Docs homepage. Click on the plus sign where it says blank to create a new document. In your new document, the first thing you
So that's about 30 seconds, and it's so much easier than writing it out for students. I also recommend you do this for even the things that you think your students will know, because even though we feel like our students are often way better at technology than we are, some of them aren't. Some of them really might not know how to create Google Docs. I have students who I've shown for the 3rd time how to share a Google Doc. They're just not really comfortable yet with the technology. So when they email me and they're struggling with something, I can just send them the video. I often post these on my instructional page as well, but then when they have questions, I can send it again and say, hey, watch the beginning part of this video. And it makes it a lot more accessible for students. They can also re-watch as many times as they want and do it along with the video, and it's a lot more like providing one-on-one support. If you or any of your students, oh, I almost forgot. So I created a whole bunch of these tutorials for my students. Initially for our ESL department here at Kapi'olani. And so I created a whole bank of digital tools, Google tools, tools on Laulima, like how to use the assignment tool, how to use forums, how to use the quiz tool, and then a variety of other tools like Zoom and things like that. So I included on the handout a link to a document that has links to all of those different tutorials. So if you want to use any of them with your students and my voice doesn't irritate you and your students, please feel free, you're welcome to. I created them because what is freely available on YouTube is often too fast for some of my students. So anyway, those are linked on the handout and you're welcome to use them however you want. If you or your students are not quite as tech savvy and you want something a little more low tech, creating step-by-step instructions with screenshots can also make a huge difference. So this, even just simply writing it step-by-step and then including screenshots of what those things look like can really help students if you don't want to do a screencast, you're not comfortable with that. Or if you have students who don't have the bandwidth to really watch a lot of videos, that's another option. And that can really reduce barriers to students not being able to do an assignment because they're just not sure how to get started. The next tip that I have for helping students access and understand information is chunking your information with questions. So if you're going to create a video lesson for your students, I recommend having certain pause points throughout your lesson, as you might do in a face-to-face class. In a face-to-face class, you might stop and say, okay, turn to a neighbor and discuss that point that we just talked about, or ask any questions. The app Edpuzzle is something that allows you to embed this, and it is one of my favorite tools. It's free up to 20 videos, and 20 videos is kind of a lot. You can also, in Edpuzzle, you can use teacher-created lessons, so screencast presentations you've done, but you can also use anything that's available on YouTube, Khan Academy, basically anywhere on the internet. And what Edpuzzle allows you to do is embed these questions at key points throughout the video. What this does is it gives students an opportunity to pause and think about whether they understood what they just heard and what they just saw. If you have a 10-minute video and students watch it from beginning to end, they may not know if they've missed something important, but if you embed this question, it can help them pause and reflect. Also to notice that, okay, this is a key point because my teacher's asking me about it. Even with those pause points, I highly recommend keeping your videos short. If you have 20 minutes of content, I recommend making at least 2 videos out of that, so students can digest in short chunks. A lot of our students get a lot more fatigued online, and so having something short and then being able to take a break and coming back to another segment can be really important. If you don't want to learn Edpuzzle or you don't want to ask your students to, you can also just record and create your own pause point and say, pause the video here and answer the question. And then you can embed questions on Laulima. Although the question tool on Laulima has been a little funky for me this semester. I don't know about you guys, but you could do it in a Google form or a Google Doc, something else where they're pausing the video and answering questions. Any way to just give them that thinking time and processing time. So I'm going to show you just a brief video of what Edpuzzle looks like. And if you look along the bottom, all of these little dots, those are points where I've embedded questions. So you can see when a question is coming up. The students also get this list along the side of at what point in the video there are questions. So you're going to listen to me with my narrated lesson, and then you'll see when the questions pop up. And in the video, I talk a little bit about what's going on. But it's just about a minute, so you can kind of see how the program works.
This is also an example of active learning. It's very hard to not be engaged if you're doing a hands-on activity in a cooperative learning group or teaching somebody your content. You can see the correct answer here, but I'm going to intentionally choose the wrong answer so you see what happens. When you choose the wrong answer, it will give students the option to go back and rewatch that section so that they can try to get it correct. They can also skip and move on with distractions and alternatives. So engagement actually is motivation plus implementation. You get the choice to go back and rewatch even when you get the answer correct, just in case you want to check your information. I also always add one question or food for thought at the very end of the video to encourage students to watch all the way to the end. I have noticed many students stop at the last question.
And the reason I know they stop at the last question is because Edpuzzle actually gives you a bunch of data. You can see, and this is even in the free version, you can see all of your students' names, what percentage of the video they watched, and which questions they got correct or incorrect. So after I started adding one more question or final thought at the end, I noticed students tended to watch all the way to the end. But it gives really good feedback for the teacher, because if a lot of students get the same question wrong, then you know you have to go back and reteach that. You can also add open-ended questions that you go in and then grade manually. Another way that you can break down information and make it easier for your students to access and follow along is by using an online resource bank or a HyperDoc. The example you're seeing is just a Google Doc, and it has all of the information for a several step project that the students are doing. So on one Google Doc, they have links for what they need to read, the different activities they need to do, and then their final task. And this can be a really good way to organize information for an assignment, so that students have everything in one place. They don't have to go to a bunch of different places to find the content and then the assignment. If you're using the lessons tool on Laulima, you can do that as well in the lessons tool really well. But if you're not, if you're using Google Classroom or something else, creating these HyperDocs can be really helpful. And I linked in the handout some examples, but our handout is also an example of a HyperDoc because you have all those links in there. You can also embed it in Laulima, so students don't even have to go elsewhere to open it. It can just be visible. Oops, reload. Always technical difficulties. I was telling Jamie and Yushin right before we started, once when I was presenting, my entire slide just went blank. And there it went. Okay, well, I was going to show you an example of a Padlet, which I created for my students. And Padlet is like an online bulletin board, and I'm going to show that to you later. But basically, I created different columns on the Padlet and provided resources for my students, video resources and articles, so that they could choose information without having to go find it themselves. So this is the first step in a research project that I'm doing with my students. And I wasn't quite ready to let them loose on Google Scholar and EBSCOhost. So I curated the resources, and then they practiced looking at the videos, looking at the research articles, pulling information from that. And then once they were comfortable using sources, then we went and we learned how to find them. But sadly, you don't get to see that today, I guess. Always something. The next thing that some of our students can struggle with, particularly if they're non-native speakers, is reading comprehension. And this can feel a lot heavier for them in online settings. So in online settings, there's often more independent reading, less opportunities to ask those clarifying questions, less opportunity for the teacher to check in, to circulate and say, hey, does everybody understand? Also, sometimes students are really motivated by the teacher and their peers. So there can be less encouragement and less motivation for them to persist or engage in reading when they're doing it by themselves on their couch. So some things that we can do to support our students is teach them how to use certain tools. And then we can allow them to choose to use them or not. But certain things like text to speech can be really helpful for non-native speakers, but also just for sort of reluctant or struggling readers. For students who don't really like to read or it's a chore for them, if they can listen and read at the same time, it can actually make that task so much less daunting. There are also online vocabulary lookups or ways to annotate with different colored highlighters. So let's take a look. One program that I love is Read and Write for Chrome. It's a Chrome plugin. Teachers get the Pro version for free, and the Pro version has amazing features. But I'm only going to talk about the free features because that's what our students can get unless they want to pay for a license. But Read and Write will plug into Chrome, so it can be used on any online source. So Google Doc, Laulima, web page, whatever you like. So on the free version, students can get text to speech, so they can read and listen at the same time. And Read and Write will highlight the text along while it's reading, so they can follow along really easily. The next feature is there is also a translation feature. And with this feature, students can highlight one word at a time in the free version, and whatever language they set as their default language, it will translate for them. And I checked it out, and it actually has Hawaiian. I don't know how good it is. It has Japanese. It has a variety of other languages. For certain languages that it has a little more support for, like Spanish, you can see this arrow next to it means it will actually read it out loud. That's not available for Hawaiian or Japanese because they're not there yet, but hopefully it's coming. So those are some really neat features. Another feature is a read aloud, where it opens up a microphone. The students can read aloud and then they can listen back, so they can compare their reading with the text. And this can be really helpful for non-native speakers or for language learners. Another way to support reading comprehension is to amplify the text or to add features. You can highlight, add notes, definitions, or embed videos or images to build background for your students. And you can embed questions throughout using this tool called Insert Learning. And it is freemium. You can do 5 lessons for free. Otherwise, it's like $40 a year. But it's really neat because if you have a text, an online text that you want your students to read, but you think they're going to struggle with it, you can build in these supports that you might actually normally present in a classroom setting. So I'm going to give you just a quick overview of what that looks like. I think about a minute you can see.
With Insert Learning, you can add interactive supports to any website. You just click on the IL icon, and it brings this toolbar over to the side. You can highlight text and provide definitions for students. You can also embed a Post-it note and embed a video in that Post-it note. Build. This can add background knowledge or amplify the information for students. You can also add questions, and then students can type their answers to the questions. You can also add highlights to draw students' attention to certain words, phrases, or sections. Students can also highlight and add Post-it notes. When you are finished, you can go back to your dashboard and you can assign to a class. If you're using Google Classroom, you can add it directly into Google Classroom.
Well, that's my recording voice, I guess. But you can see how you can build in those different supports. And this is just on any online source. So you can find a news article and then create this version of it for your students. And those questions, I didn't show so much in the video, but you can have it so that you receive the answers, or you can have it more like discussion where the students can see each other's responses to the questions throughout. So it's another way to build in some discussion. Okay, I just threw a lot of information at you. So I want you to take a minute and get out that piece of paper that I asked you to get and just write a comment about one of the following. So either a barrier you can reduce with one of the tools or strategies you just heard about, or a tool or strategy you'd like to try, or any other idea that popped into your head during these last few minutes that you had for using a digital tool. So just take about a minute and jot down that note, and we're going to share those at the end. Forgot to unmute myself. All right. Now I want to talk a little bit about some digital tools to support action and expression with your students. So this is different ways for students to interact with the material, to demonstrate their understanding, or to apply their understanding. So I recommend providing options and variety for students to demonstrate their understanding and their knowledge, even when you're not in an online setting. I think oftentimes we sort of default to writing assessments or tests and quizzes, when in reality, not all of our students are going to succeed with writing or tests and quizzes as well as they might in some other formats. So in my classes, even when I'm teaching face-to-face, I like to really think about my assignments and my assessments and think about, does it have to be written? Does it have to be a test or quiz? And if it doesn't, I like to provide my students with options of ways that they can show me that they understand. For some of our students, particularly non-native speakers, they might really struggle with writing, or they might be okay writers, but really have anxiety about writing. And it might interfere with their ability to really show us what they know. So we can provide options or different ways for students to present their information. Now, sometimes, of course, they're going to have to do something in a writing class or in a writing intensive class. But some of the steps building up to the final writing process, we might be able to do using different modalities to support our learners as well. So online, again, students sometimes are going to face more limited opportunities to clarify the assignment instructions. So if they're reading and they get stuck, they can't just say, oh, hey, and raise their hand or ask a classmate. Oftentimes, students who have questions aren't going to go email the teacher. They're just going to say, well, I guess I'll figure it out, or I don't know, I guess I can't do it. And I have a student in my house that does this. So I know they're out there, and they will often just not ask. They'll just try to figure it out or just assume they're supposed to know. Also, some of our students, and this can be cultural or it can just be personality, some of them don't really know how to ask for help, or they're not confident. And so these can all provide some barriers for our students. And also, there's often more limited scaffolding and models compared to what we would do in a face-to-face classroom. And again, they don't have that peer, that student sitting next to them that they can just turn to quickly and say, hey, what are we supposed to do? So I'm going to show a few examples of tools that allow students to demonstrate their knowledge in a variety of different ways that might make it easier and more comfortable for them to demonstrate their understanding, or just be more fun. I'm a big fan of using presentations. So when I need my students to tell me that they've understood the key points in a unit that I've taught them, I often allow them to do it in writing or to create a presentation. If they just want to put bullet points of the key points on a slide, and that can show me that they know, that works really well for me. They're also really a lot easier to grade sometimes because they're organized. This is also something we can provide as the teacher, particularly for a scaffold for a presentation or for a writing assignment. We can tell students what headings they need to have for different sections, and then they just fill in the content. So it's like giving them an outline. And this can be really helpful when they're doing group presentations. So if you do group presentations, you can assign a section to each group member to make sure that you don't end up with one group member doing all of the work and vice versa. So then they know exactly which part they're supposed to fill in. And then if you use something like Google Slides, the group members and the teacher can give live feedback on Google Slides, and they can comment and reply. And so students can feel a lot more like they're getting that in-person support. That can also be scaffolded into a video presentation. A lot of times students prefer to talk about something than to write about something. So they can do that through video presentations. And Adobe Spark is actually an amazing way for individuals or groups to create presentations. They can create their Google Slides first and then save those slides as images and then upload them into Adobe and add their narration. And you can actually have group collaboration. Before Adobe Spark came along with this, if you have students do a group video, it usually falls on the shoulder of one student to do all of the collaborating or all of the putting it together. So I'm going to show you this quick video so you can see just how easy it is to have students collaborate.
I'm going to click on the blue Create a Project button, and for this example, I'm going to create a new video. First, I need to give it a name. Then I can choose a template to build my story from or make up my own. And now I'm ready to start building. The feature I'd like to share with you today is the collaboration feature. You can invite others to collaborate with you on your Adobe Spark video project by clicking on this icon on the top of the screen. You then enter another email address and click Invite. That person will receive an email inviting them to join the project. Additionally, if they log into their Spark account with that email, they will see the project available for them to edit.
Okay, so you can see it's pretty easy for students to collaborate on that. Another really easy way to provide options for students is to allow them to just create an audio or video recording of themselves, sharing the key points, their key understandings, or demonstrating their knowledge. So you can just have, a lot of times I have students just record their answers to my key questions rather than writing it. And a lot of times they really prefer that. It also allows students to re-record before they have to present something or before they have to share. And you can also use this to scaffold writing assignments if you have students who do much better in spoken English than in writing. But I have students who love to submit their assignments. They just pull out their iPhone, tell me what they learned, and then they're done. And it's easy to review it that way as well. Another option is infographics. Piktochart and Canva are really great apps, and your more creative students might prefer to use images and key points rather than writing something out. This is also a really neat way for students to share their research or share the outline of what they're going to write about with classmates. One other way to give students different opportunities is by using digital books. I love this app Book Creator because students can add pictures, they can add audio, and for any of the language teachers in the room, students can actually narrate in their first language and the language that they're learning. So I'm going to just show you this quick example.
Açaí. De açaizeiro. O açaizeiro. The açaizeiro is a tree that bears fruit all year round, and each can reach 20 meters high. Açaizeiro é uma árvore que dá frutos durante todo o ano e pode chegar a 20 metros de altura.
So you can see the student did research, and rather than just writing a paper, chunked the information into different pages of this book, and then the student was able to read it out loud in English and in Portuguese. So this can be really great for language classes, but even in regular content classes where you have students just presenting the information monolingually, this can be a really neat support. This is also another option that I just let my students choose if they want to do it instead of a writing assignment. And it's very user-friendly and easy to use. Oops. Okay, one other thing that students can struggle with more in online learning is task and time management. So monitoring their own progress. The teacher isn't really there to monitor their facial expressions, how well they're understanding. So students really need to self-monitor. A lot of times in online settings, you might release all of the content on one day and all of the assignments are due another day, rather than chunking things and seeing students at different intervals. So I created a couple of checklists using Google Forms that I use with my students. There's one which is a task or assignment checklist where students can go down and check off if they've completed all of the assignments for that week. If you're using Laulima Lessons page, the checklist is really good for that as well. The one next to it is the check-in. I actually use this with my students bi-weekly, and I have them just fill out how they're feeling. If they want to tell me more about the response, they don't have to. And then I ask them how well did they understand the content and do they have any questions? And I've been really amazed at how many questions students will ask me in the check-in form that they don't email me. And students who never email me questions will often put questions in that form. So it's a really low stress, I think, ways for students to tell me that they are stressed out or that they have questions when they might not otherwise do that. So it allows them to connect more and really feel like there's a teacher there. And so I just embed this into my Laulima page every 2 weeks. I don't do it every week because by the time I collect the responses and email the students back that have questions, it would be time to do it all over again. Okay, So I just threw a lot more information at you. Pull out that scratch paper and write down some notes about digital tools for action and expression. I'm going to give you about 1 minute. Oh, and for those of you who like the Google form, I linked it on the handout so you can copy it, make your own copy and edit if it's something that you want to use. You don't have to start from scratch. Okay, in the interest of time and me talking too much, I'm going to move along. If you're still jotting down your notes, that's okay. We're now going to look at some digital tools to support engagement. Again, some of the challenges with online learning is that students are often working alone without peer support. And sometimes they get motivated by being around their students, by being around other students and their teachers. And sometimes students get really frustrated if they're working in isolation, that they don't know if they're right or wrong, and they don't know if they're on the right track. So if we can build in ways for students to collaborate and discuss, this can be really powerful for them. So we're going to look at collaborative documents, practice applications, online discussions, and then some synchronous mini activities. One thing I really recommend, particularly in the online environment, is focusing on giving reinforcement and feedback for mastery-oriented feedback. So giving students feedback with the option to revise before they get a grade for something. This can make students a lot more willing to make risks and to try again. So collaborative documents, we're probably all familiar with these with Google Docs, but this can be a really great way for students to feel connected and engage with each other. They can co-create, they can leave feedback for each other, teachers can leave feedback, so it can be a lot more dynamic and a lot quicker feedback for students. If you have students co-create a document, just like with presentations, you can chunk it out and give them different sections to work on. One amazing tool that I have found allows teachers to give audio comments as well as text comments. So you can record your audio just with a plugin in Google Docs called Kaizena, also free. And you can also create a rubric that you then link to your Google Doc, and you just click a few buttons and it generates a whole rubric to give feedback for your students. So I'm going to show you a quick demo here.
Sometimes this is a lot to write in a comment, and maybe your students would do better listening. If you want to leave verbal comments, you can do that with a plugin called Kaizena. So let's say I want to leave this same comment. I can do this with a voice message. So I highlight it, click, rather than start by saying, so now I can stop and post. And when the student sees this, they can click on play and they can hear my comment related to that section of text. You start by saying, I can also leave the same comment via text. So then when the student opens up their Kaizena add-on, they can see textual comments as well as verbal comments. I can also add a rubric. The rubric is made up of skills that you pre-program with criteria. Let's take a look. As I go through my student's assignment, I'll highlight a section and then give feedback on that skill. For example, the introduction. Again, using the skills that I pre-programmed in with criteria. Then, once I'm finished, I select rubric and it collects all of the skills. It will even tally and give a total score. And then I can even include summary comments for my students.
Okay, so this is really neat. You would need to teach your students how to install the Kaizena plugin into their own Google Docs, but it's relatively straightforward. Okay, I am almost out of time, so I'm gonna skip ahead, but just other opportunities for practice are quiz games like Quizlet or Kahoot. This is a Padlet that you can use for online discussions, or KWL to activate students' background knowledge, and you can embed Padlet directly into Laulima. Flipgrid is another way. It's a great way to have students have asynchronous conversations and see each other. I also love using Flipgrid in the beginning of the semester for introductions, because then I can learn how to pronounce all of my students' names correctly. And shout out to Carl Polly and Jan Fried, who told me yesterday that the captions are available in multiple languages and are actually pretty good. So if you're a foreign language teacher, apparently the non-English captions have gotten really good. Flipgrid also has a bunch of content already that you can add to. And then the last thing I wanted to share was just synchronous mini activities. If you're using synchronous time with your students, I recommend that you use it intentionally for collaboration, discussion, and interaction. If you can screencast it, do it asynchronously. You don't need to just lecture on Zoom or on Google Hangouts. I like to have really short chunks of activities and have students in their breakout rooms doing something on a Google Doc or Google Slides or Padlet, so that I can see their progress even when I'm not in their particular breakout room. I wanted to show you a little video of how I manage my Zoom, but I'll do that in a minute. So those are the big ideas for the digital tools for engagement. I was gonna have you guys share on Padlet, but I think I have run out of time. I'm still going to share the Padlet link with you all. So maybe even after you leave here today, you can drop your ideas onto the Padlet, and that way you can see what your other colleagues thought about ideas for supporting students. So I'll just show you what the Padlet looks like, and then hopefully you guys will be willing to just put a couple of ideas in there, and then you can kind of connect with each other and see what your other colleagues wanted to do. So for Padlet, you just click on the plus sign and then you add your idea. So that was the way I was going to have you guys interact, although it seems that I talk too much. So I'm gonna do my quick wrap up. Let me get back over there. There we go. I'm gonna do my quick wrap up now, and then I will stick around for some questions. I have a few tips for managing Zoom, and I'm gonna share that at the end. So in case anybody wants to get out of here, you can. But my final thoughts is just design short chunks of lessons. Students get a lot more fatigued in online instruction. And remember, you're not bound to the clock like you are in a face-to-face classroom. Try to remember to use synchronous time meaningfully and humanize your curriculum. Connect with your students and have check-in opportunities for feedback. Remind them that you are there. Especially now in this pandemic learning, a lot of our students are feeling really vulnerable and isolated. So if we can build in the connection and that human connection to the curriculum, sometimes that is the most support that they need. So my last couple of reminders: start with the goal, not the tool, no matter how shiny the tool is. Support learner variability with digital tools, and model how to use the tools. So make sure that the tool does not become a barrier to the students. And then allow flexibility and choice when you can. Allow students to do what feels good for them. And then always, always, less is more for our students and for us. Remember, you don't have to do it all. Put your mask on first before you put on your students' masks, just like they tell you in airplanes, those things that we used to be allowed to go on, if you remember. So that is it. Also, I collaborated with Dr. Kavita Rao at UH Manoa and Dr. Sean Smith at University of Kansas last March, and we put a lot of this information online on schoolvirtually.org. So if you want some more resources, there is lots more. It's all free and available on there. So start small, don't try to use all the tools at once. If you have questions, let me know. And then if anybody wants to stay late, I will show you my tricks for managing presenting in Zoom and still being able to see all of your students and all of your other documents. So maybe Jamie and Yo-Yo will let me stay a little bit late and just record that.
Absolutely. This was awesome. Thank you so much, Carrie. There were a couple of questions in the chat. Taylor, did you want to go ahead and unmute and ask?
I'm sorry, I forgot my question.
Oh, okay. No worries. Maybe we answered it. Just in terms of your tutorials that you shared, Carrie, is it okay for folks to share those out with students?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
I made them to be student friendly. So you will notice I am talking very
Auditory
slowly.
moment.
So yeah, use them any way that you want. Feel free.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we will have, we're hoping to have the recording up by the end of the day because Mayana's sharing is caring. She's going to share it with her colleagues. And I'll get the slides link from Carrie and the handout, and those are all shareable. This is a wealth of resources. So thank you so much. Does anyone else have some questions before we have Carrie share her whole kind of desktop setup with us?
Jamie, this is Yo-Yo. So
Yeah.
I think we have a question about coming from Jamie for another Jamie, not you, for the Kaizena. And she asked, do both parties, teachers and students, need to install the tool, or can just the teacher have it?
Yes, that's a great question. The students also have to install the tool. So I would recommend doing a quick screencast, or I can send you one where you show the students how to go into their Google Doc, how to add the add-on, and then install it. It's actually really, really easy for them to do, but they do have to have it installed to listen to the audio.
Great, thanks. If anybody has any more questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, Carrie, if you want to just share with us your setup, that would be awesome.
Okay, perfect. So I made a short video so you could see my desktop, because I've been teaching online since last fall, and I've just been playing around with how to manage everything. As I mentioned, I like to have Google Slides or Google Docs for my students when they're in breakout rooms, because I like to see what they're working on and what's happening, even if I can't be in their breakout room. So I know if nothing's happening, I have to go check on that group and help them out. So these are just my tips for managing Zoom. Again, I just recorded so that you can see my desktop and how I'm doing everything. So what you're going to see now is what's happening on the other side. So it's just about, I think, 3 minutes or so. It's pretty short. So here we go. Oh, 4 minutes.
I'm going to share some tricks for presenting in Zoom and still being able to see all of your students' faces and manage any other activities you're doing. First, you can see I've opened up a really small window with my Google Slides, and I've put it side by side with Zoom. If I have my whole class of students, I will click on Gallery View, and then I can see all 22 of my students if I expand this window just a little bit. Then when I present using Google Slides, I don't use the regular presentation mode because that fills up the entire screen. And I still want to be able to see my students and navigate in and out of Google Docs or whatever I'm having them work in. So what I do is I choose Presenter View. So that opens up this little window, which I actually shrink down and pull below. When I share my screen, I'm going to choose the option of Google Chrome. So it'll only show what's in that browser window. I like to share the browser window because if I'm going to show my students how to do something on Laulima or in a program that we're going to use, you can toggle back and forth very easily without having to stop sharing. I always make sure that in my browser, I only have the tabs that I'm going to use in class so that I don't accidentally open my email on Zoom or anything like that. Another reason I like opening two separate windows is because now I can have the chat open. So if I'm doing an activity and I need to give my students the link to the Google Doc or anything like that, I can have the chat box open. It also helps me monitor my students' questions better. So I did an activity with my students and I have a link here in the notes. I can actually just copy it there and paste it right into the chat box. And it makes it really easy for me to share these different links that I'm planning to use. Another thing I can do, if I forget where I'm at or I want to make a change on the slide, I can actually pause my sharing. And then I can get in here and I can do whatever I want. And the student's view is frozen on the slide where I paused the share. What you're seeing on the right is the student view when I paused the share. Now, as I'm doing this, let's say I want to go in and I want to edit something. Maybe I found a typo. The students can't see that. Resume share. And now if I advance the slide, you can see what the students are seeing. If you want access to the edit view when you're presenting, you can actually choose the advanced features and you can select a portion of the screen. Then you'll click share and it will allow you to drag this square so that it's just covering your slide. Now, again, you can see that your students will only see what's inside the green slide. So I can click through my presentation this way. The one drawback to this is if you have animations, they won't fly in because you're in edit mode. So you'll have to create additional slides to replicate animations. One benefit to this is if you want to have students focus in on something, or if you're looking at a text and you want to highlight just one line, you can actually use this to replicate a zoom feature. If I want to highlight just the instructions, I can zoom in like this, and you can see on the split screen, this makes it really big, and this is all that the students see. Now, if I don't want them to see me resizing it, as I did before, I just pause the sharing, resize, and then don't forget to resume sharing. So those are just a couple tricks for when you're using Zoom. Okay, those are my Zoom management tricks for you. Again, if you have any questions, send me an email. Thank you all for sharing some of your Tuesday with me. And I'll stick around for another minute or two in case anybody, or a few minutes in case people have more questions.
Yay, thank you so much, Carrie. Does anyone else have any other questions?
I do have a question for Carrie, if you don't mind. Carrie,
Sure,
you just
of course.
said that the Edpuzzle has a limitation for 20 videos, right? As you may know, like, do you know if I run out of 20, could I just delete some of the old videos and recycle using like that limitation of 20 videos?
Yes, great question. So what happens is once you reach 20, it just doesn't allow you to store anymore. So if you go in and you delete something, then you can store a new one. So yeah, that's a great question.
So that's, could I understand that's per account, per
Yes.
education account, right?
Yes,
Oh, okay. Thank you.
you're welcome. And it's pretty easy to learn how to use. It's really intuitive.
Any other questions for Carrie before we close out? Taylor said your hashtag new goals.
Oh, my one trick that you guys probably saw in that screen, anytime I try something new, I just join my Zoom session with my phone so that I can double check on my phone that what I think is happening is really what's happening. So Taylor, if you want to try something new, that's my little cheat. I just join it with my phone to check what it looks like.
You should see how many, I have like my laptop, I have my Surface Pro, my phone. It's like, it's so overwhelming.
Yeah, you're probably more advanced than me already then, because
No.
I only join with the phone to check. Other than that, I just use the one computer.
I think
I
that's
feel like I get too
smarter.
distracted.
Yeah. Yeah, I get too distracted.
Kelly, did you have a question?
Oh, yes. So thank you so much. First of all, this was awesome. One thing I've been trying to figure out lately since moving online is I feel compelled to give points for everything that I have my students do, whereas in the classroom, that wasn't the case. They got points for participating, but now with so many things being documented online, it's been hard for me to keep up with everything. And I'm wondering your thoughts about what we should give points to or a grade to, and what we can just, I mean, I guess if we don't give points, I wonder if students will have any motivation to do it, or what are your thoughts about managing that on our end as instructors?
Whew, that's such a good question, Kelly. And it's something that I am sort of constantly grappling with. So what I've sort of come to is anything my students submit, I will give feedback to. So I think that's really important. I don't want students to submit assignments that they don't get feedback to, because then it tends to be busy work. But I also think they don't necessarily need grades for everything either, like you said. So what I've been doing is some of the smaller assignments, like something they'll put on Padlet or something they'll do on the forum, is an opportunity to get feedback, and then they will use that in another assignment. So I try to have all of the little assignments be something that they are going to build on for the assignment that I do grade. Some things I do give points for, like the forum discussion, because I want to encourage them to do it, and I want to encourage them to give good feedback to each other. So I typically give really specific criteria for what your reply to a classmate should include. And then I'll give them some points for that. But things like Flipgrid and other things like that, this is an opportunity for them to brainstorm and then use it. So that's kind of how I'm balancing. I know there's a professor at UH who did a webinar over the summer, and his philosophy really was you just don't have to assess everything. And I want to get closer to there, but I'm still a little bit too much of a control freak to move to where totally to where he is at. But that's kind of my middle ground, that you aren't going to get a grade for it, but you will get my feedback. Often you'll get classmate feedback, and you are going to use it later. So the motivation to do it is there. And I'm really explicit about that. I try to be really explicit about the purpose for every assignment so that students know why they need to do it. And then if they don't do it, that's a conscious choice that they've decided, either I just don't have time, I don't have it in me today, or I'm okay with skipping this one for whatever my personal reason is. So I don't know if that's a helpful answer or not, but that's sort of what I've been coming to in my own head. But it's a question that I look at, probably maybe not every week, but pretty often I come back to that.
That makes sense. Yes, I think I'm still experimenting with it. What's too much and what's just right. So I'm still figuring it out. But yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a balance too. I mean, how many things can you grade as well, right? How much do the students need, and how much can we do realistically without, really being attached to the computer 24/7?
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, good question.
That was a really good question. It's like just the never-ending question. Does anybody else have any other questions for Carrie? All right. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for staying after class, everybody. Thank you so much, Carrie, for sharing all of this. I'm going to take the rest of the week and just dive into all of these resources. This is awesome. So seriously, thanks. everybody else have a great rest of the week. We have one last webinar for Top to Go tomorrow. It's the OER webinar. So if you're interested in that, being a textbook hero, join us again tomorrow at 10 a.m. Otherwise, have a great one. Thanks so much.
Thank
Bye, guys.
you.
Thank you.